Democrats and Republicans can both at least agree on one thing.
Gerrymandering makes us dumber. It makes our politics dumber.
Now you have to redraw lines?
I think our democracy is under attack.
Because of things like political gerrymandering.
Terrible gerrymandering.
Our parties have moved further and further apart.
It incentivizes extremism.
Gerrymandering is bad. But what exactly is gerrymandering? And who's doing the gerrymandering in the first place? In 1812, the governor of Massachusetts, Elbridge Gerry, not Jerry, redrew the voting districts in his state to favor his party. A political cartoonist at the time noticed that by adding legs to the districts, they resembled a rather scary-looking salamander, and the gerrymander was born. Of course, the Constitution does say that districts should be redrawn every 10 years, which makes sense since
people move.
This is our colleague and friend, Sam Levine.
I'm a reporter at HuffPost covering voting rights in America. The population at the beginning of the decade in one state might look very different from the population at the end of the decade. Redistricting is an attempt to account for that process so that the districts of a state reflect the population. If you go back a couple decades, people were quite literally drawing these maps by hand.
People like
Kim Bracey, B-R-A-C-E. I am president of a company called Election Data Services. We deal with redistricting and helping state and local governments in that process of redistricting.
And because he tends to work with Democrats,
Republicans tend to think that I gerrymander.
And Republicans would say Kim has been gerrymandering for a long time because he's
been doing this since 1977.
So help me God.
So that's where I got all the gray hair from.
But as Kim's hair got grayer, the redistricting process changed.
When we first started doing redistricting back in 1980, that was before there were PCs. We didn't even have computers. We had maps and acetate overlays.
Then in 1990,
a reestablished credibility.
We had PCs for the first time, but they were very slow. They didn't have very much power. They didn't have very much storage space. So it took a while to draw districts, but you could see them on the computer screen.
And by the new millennium,
the outcome of this election will be determined by the votes.
We saw faster computers, faster information. We ended up getting more data so that we could see more things as we were crafting districts. And as a result, we ended up having maybe 1,000 plans we could create.
But it's not just changing technology that made it easier to gerrymander.
In 2010, we had a sea change take place. The Tea Party movement.
This is just the beginning.
Instead, we had Republicans drawing the districts.
Republicans saw an unprecedented opportunity, specifically targeted state races with an eye on controlling redistricting for the next decade. There are some estimates that say that Republican gerrymandering is responsible for at least 16 seats in the current Congress.
It may not seem like a lot, but actually
that means that just by being able to manipulate the lines, Republicans have taken seats.
Understandably, that upset some people who decided to challenge partisan gerrymandering in the Supreme Court.
They were dealing with a case out of Wisconsin that challenged the constitutionality of the Wisconsin state legislative map.
It's easy to see why it was challenged. In 2012, Republicans won 63% of the state assembly, but in the presidential election, they won only 51% of the popular vote. But the case didn't go the way of the plaintiffs.
The Supreme Court said that the individual voters in Wisconsin didn't have standing to challenge the statewide map.
And so SCOTUS has kept
the Republican way of drawing districts in shape and in play to continue on for this decade. Democrats obviously are not happy with that, but they haven't figured out the way to convince a more Republican court to their way.
But not for lack of trying. There are ongoing lawsuits challenging redistricting in Ohio, Michigan, and South Carolina. But maybe if people had a better sense of
why their district looks the way it does,
there could be change.
There might be a legitimate reason that your district has a weird shape, or there might not be.
Any line change, going from Main Street to Elm Street, is going to have an impact politically. So you're really not going to be able to take the politics out of redistricting. What you can do is try to have some control over it.